But then last year we found out that that Emily with the mother Mary Magdalene Walcott died 5 days afterwards.
Samuel came from the Bell plantation, and Collimore was a slave at Amaryllis Collimore's plantation.
A very warm welcome to Archives Alive. This is episode 3. I'm Sherwood McCaskey, as always, thanks for joining us. Family is a thread that stretches across oceans, across generations, across time itself. Sometimes that thread leads us to places we have never visited, yet somehow deeply familiar places that hold the answers to questions we have carried all our lives. In this edition of Archives Alive, we meet two sisters born in Suriname, now residing in the Netherlands, who followed that thread all the way to Barbados. With little more than names, memories, and a determination to know where they truly come from, they walk through the doors of the Department of Archives here in Blackrock and began a journey that would change everything. With the expert guidance of historian and chairman of the Archives Advisory Board, Dr. Frederick Aline, they researched the records, the registers, and the remnants of lives long past. And what they found was more than history. It was identity, it was belonging, it was home. This is their story, and they're sharing it with us now on Archives Alive.
My great-grandmother is Emily Walcott, and she's always been a bit of a mystery because the rest of the family I can find out everything about in Suriname. The records are good. But I couldn't even find her death record at first. So even that, somehow they made a mistake and it was filed the wrong way. But at some point, a cousin of mine who was also interested in family trees research found it while looking for someone else, and he immediately took a picture and sent it to me. We found it, we know when she died in 1946. But now to find her birth date, because it was mentioned that she was at some point, I think 37, so calculating back, her birthday should be around 1868. FamilySearch.org has a wonderful database with all kinds of names, so I searched there, but there are many Emilys. And which one is my ancestor? No idea. So that was a problem. Trying to track all of them, just no lead, no real lead as to which one would be my Emily. And then I found an Emily, and mother was Mary Magdalene Walcott. I said, hey, that sounds good. I like Mary Magdalene, so let's go with that one. And I've been researching this for almost 30 years, so really a long time. But then last year we found out that that Emily with the mother Mary Magdalene Walcott died 5 days afterwards. That record, I completely missed it. So that was a bit of a disappointment last year. And then my sister and I decided, okay, we're just going to Barbados next year.
I work and I lecture about DNA in combination with paper research, and what I always say is you need 3 things if you want to research a part that is not very clear. You need the DNA test, you need the paperwork, the archives, and you need the family stories. And it's good to begin with the family stories.
I can remember my grandmother. We had a very close connection, and she would tell me about her grandmother sitting with her, just like I was sitting with her, telling her about times in slavery, and she would tell me the stories. And I really thought I would remember them all. I didn't write them down. I don't know them anymore. Just some fragments. And she told me so much. So it's very important for people now to go to the older generation and talk to them and get all the information, do some research, do some real research, because otherwise it will be gone, and that would be a waste. I really think that would be a waste.
Because that will give you information, write it down, record it, because you will need it later. And I always say, ask about everything, what people ate, where they were. You never know what will come in useful. And with the DNA it's the same. Every generation you lose half of your DNA. You get half of your DNA from the other parent, but you lose half of the DNA from both parents. Otherwise we would have a lot of DNA at the end. So when you do a DNA test, before you even think of doing yours, think of doing your mother or your grandmother's, because that is the DNA that would give a lot of information.
I did DNA tests with Ancestry.com. It's very simple. It's a little tube, you put some spit in and you send it, and 6 to 8 weeks later you get a result. About ethnicity, but that's not 100% correct. But the matches, the DNA doesn't lie about that. The matches are correct. And I found a match with a good family tree that I could trace back with Francis Hall Walcott and Isabel Gibbs Thornhill. But now to find out how am I exactly related, we are related, but you have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, and it doubles.
I did my father's DNA, the Dutch one, and we could find everything a long time ago. But my mother's DNA was giving problems, even in Suriname, because in the days when I began my research, it was hard to find anything. And my mother knew a lot, and she told me, and unfortunately I wrote down a lot, so I still know a lot, but she passed away, and now I would want to ask her some more questions, but I have to do with what I have. But I knew my grandmother was a slave, and I knew from what plantation she came in Suriname. That is a district in Suriname, it's called Nikeri, and that is where a lot of Barbadian contract laborers went to. They went all over Suriname, but a lot of them went in that district. It's close to Guyana, and they spoke English up there, so it was easier to get there.
We have a long connection to Suriname, in that it was one of the places that in the very early part of our colonial history, the then governor, Willoughby, decided that he would attempt to start a colony out of Barbados in Suriname. Subsequent to that, we have had, in the post-emancipation period, Barbadians moving to Suriname to seek a better life, just like they went to Guyana, and later to places like Brazil, Panama, and throughout the Caribbean, even back to Africa. So Suriname is also a part of that migration history of Barbados.
And my Suriname ancestors who were slaves were from plantations from the Caribbean, because plantation owners from all kinds of islands, Grenada and everywhere, took their slaves away just before the abolition, and they brought them to Nikeri, where abolition was only 30 years later, and they could go on having their plantations and having the slave work for them. So although I have Surinamese grandmother, I haven't found out where, but she came from one of the islands with the owner. And at the end of the slavery period, which was in Suriname, abolition was in 1863, the former slaves didn't want to work and they couldn't import another batch of people, so they started to import contract laborers in Suriname.
The planters in Suriname decided that they would seek Barbadians to work on the plantations there. So from in the 1860s, Barbadians were going to Suriname, and up until the 1890s, early 1890s. After that initial period, and during that period, well over 2,000 Barbadians made the move to Suriname.
I knew I had Barbadian ancestors because my great-grandfather came from Barbados, and from the other side, the great-grandmother came from Barbados, but I didn't know much about them. So I went to look, and I searched for them, and I found we have a book with Professor Lamure with others wrote, and all the contract laborers who came to Suriname with an official contract are in that book. So there I found my great-grandmother, and I could see when she came to Suriname and when she was, what was her age about. And then I could find online her parents, and when I searched for them, I found where they were from. And they were named Samuel and Collimore. And the Samuel came from the Bell Plantation, and the Collimore was a slave at Amaryllis Collimore's plantation. So I found those, and I think I got as far as you can get, because after that it stops. And my other side was a Lashley, and I know my grandfather went with the whole family to Barbados about 1917, someplace. And he had a grand family because he had 10 children, and he had 2 children from his sister living with him. Because they went here with a big company. And my mother told me she went to St. John where her grandfather was born. And she said we went to St. John, and there was a church where her grandfather was baptized, and it was on a hill. She said it was on a hill. So I had some information because of that, because of the stories. And she said, yes, I met an aunt, and it was a Mrs. Cumberbatch. So I looked in the archive. I eventually found Mrs. Cumberbatch because she was a teacher. So because of the stories I have written down when I was like 18, it was easier eventually for me to find my family. And I didn't know the name of my great-grandfather, but I found it eventually because he was in Suriname as well, but he didn't come with a contract. So he was not in the book with the contracts.
We know about the 2,000 and odd persons who were recorded, but like the migration to British Guyana, many went on their own. So those persons would not have registered anywhere, but they would have gone there. And of course, when you listen to the story of our of Sila and Silvana, you will realize that some of these little issues that will arise when you are doing your family research. Because in many ways you find that, for instance, for Guyana, Barbadians registered, but there were many who were not registered. Shipping arrangements were fairly good between Barbados and the northern coast of South America, and people took the opportunity to go on their own, or were invited by family members who were already there. So they weren't necessarily in official registers.
So they went from Barbados to Guyana, and then just crossed the river to Suriname, found a job, but they were not registered anywhere. And some of them came by themselves. They just booked passage and looked for work, or like Silvana's ancestor as a stowaway, and those you cannot find. So I couldn't find my grandfather first. So I found him, and his name, my grandfather's name was Francis O'Neill Lashley, and his father's name was, I think, George Henry Lashley. But I didn't know that by then, but I didn't know where to look, so I started to look with my DNA. I did a DNA test, and I saw I had a lot of matches with Lashleys and with Seeleys. And most of them came from St. John, but I knew the relatives should be in St. John, so I worked on with my matches. And a match is someone with whom you share DNA. And if you share a lot of DNA with someone, then it's a close relative. If you share a small bit of DNA, it's a faraway relative. But I was looking for the faraway relatives because they could give information. And I looked at them, and I looked at their family tree. And then I made what they call a dirty tree. I put in their family, and I researched their family and go up and up and up. And finally I found, that was a bit of good luck. I found a Lashley who married a Seeley, and because I had Seeley matches and a lot of Lashley matches, I looked into that family, and I saw they were married and they had one child after marriage, but I found that there were a lot of children, and later on I knew it were their children, but they were married in slavery, so I only could see like Sam and Bill on the slavery list, but I could bring them together because at the last slavery list they already had a last name, and that was a bit of luck. So they were called by their last name, and I could put them together. And there was a couple like Harriet Seeley and Samuel Lashley, and Harriet was from Cliff Plantation in St. John, and Samuel was from Kendall. After the emancipation, they married, but they had a big family before they were married. And one of Harriet's children was my great-grandfather. So I found him. I think he was born in 1824, and I think he was born on the Cliff Plantation where his mother was. And he was later on Kendall Plantation, and I don't know what happened. I don't know anything about his early life. I only know that later in his life he was in Suriname, and he was my grandfather's father. My grandfather was born in 1872. So what happened in between, I have no idea, but he left Barbados and he came to Suriname, and there is where he died.
One of the things that is important in the story that is being shared by Sylvana and Sila is that doing your family histories involve lots of patience, trying to record those stories of those people around you who have these stories to share, because those stories will help if there are spaces in the documentation or vice versa. The importance of doing DNA tests, especially now that, especially with particular migrations where records are not as clean as one would like, and to make sure that you save these stories, because they will become important as you do your searches. I know that many people today are afraid of DNA, but it is one of the best ways to help to connect some of those dots that you may not be able to connect through the records. Because there will be someone, most likely out there in the family, who is doing the same thing, unknown to you. But here's where the DNA will assist you in bridging those gaps.
You really have to be involved. You really have to want to know your family, because it is a lot of work to find out. And you have to do a lot of paperwork as well. So if it's something you are interested in, it's a possibility to find relations that you have not found before. And I always warn people who want to do that, you should think about it really good, because you might find things you do not want to know. So that is what you have to do, because I asked my father-in-law to do a test and we found his grandfather was not his grandfather. So that is what can come up too. But if you don't mind, then you can find all kinds of relations and you find all kinds of persons that you didn't know. And if there is a story in the family like maybe that Johnson was the father, then you can confirm that or not, by doing a DNA test. So I'm a fan of that.
We went to the cemeteries, but the cemeteries are not giving much information because the big graves are from white people, but I'm not looking for white ancestors. My Emily was formerly enslaved. She was illiterate and when she went to Suriname. So I have no idea where to go from here now. I'm a little bit stuck, so I would love for more people, especially the older generation, to do some DNA testing. Actually, that's in the Netherlands. There were questions in the parliament because there's someone who wants to have the descendants of formerly enslaved to have free DNA testing to be able to research their family. I'm not sure that's going to be reality, but I would love for more people, elderly people, to do DNA testing, because when they're gone, it wasn't there when my grandparents were alive, so I couldn't test them. One uncle I did test, and that gave some information, but yes, everybody else is gone. The DNA testing is something very recent, so there's not much I can do about that.
DNA is important if you do not know everything about your family. No, and I have all kinds of gaps because I think here it's as well, but in Suriname, even if you know your mother in the slave register, where mothers and child were combined. If a child was born, it would say, let's say, Eliza, child of Mary. So you can make the connection, but never a mention of a father, because a father could be from a neighboring plantation, and there should be no discussion about who was the owner of the child. The owner of the mother was the owner of the child, and the father was not important. So we don't know the fathers, we only know the mothers. And that stayed in the society since then, but that's something else. But I was looking for the fathers, and there's no way you can find the fathers other than with oral history or with DNA, because there are no records of them.
I uploaded my DNA kit, that's for free, on my heritage. And there we found another match. But the other match is not quite clear. It also comes back to Walcott. So I think the name might be correct. But which Walcott is not clear. And we have a theory that the same Mary Magdalene Walcott was at some point married to Bostic. And I think the fourth child is called Amelia Cassandra Walcott. And I think Mary Magdalene might have become naughty and had an extramarital affair with someone, and maybe that child was not really accepted in the family. And then she left the country as a stowaway and changed her name into her elder sister, who died and was called Emily. So that's one possibility I'm working with. But it might not be true at all. But I'm just guessing. I have a vivid imagination, so I'm just guessing at what, might be true or not.
I cannot go any further. I could go, like, I could broaden everything, see all kinds of relatives there's who still live here and who I'm related to. My grandmother's side was a Samuel Collimore side, and I've never been able to find anybody. My grandmother was born in Suriname, and her mother left her in Suriname when she was a baby with a friend, and she said, I will come back together. I don't know why she went to Barbados soon. And she didn't come back for 18 years. And when she was in Barbados, I can see 11 months later, she had another child. And so my grandmother and her sister there's only a year in between. And I saw that sister was Hilaria Samuel, and she married an Eiffel later. And like last month, I saw I had Eiffel matches on Ancestry, and I wrote them a message. I said, are you related to that and that person? And it was an Eiffel from Trinidad and Tobago and one from the United States. And they both said, well, we have family from Barbados, but we don't really know a lot about them. So then we shared information, and it was my Eiffel. So my grandmother and their foremother were sisters, or probably half sisters, because mine was born in Suriname and the other one was born in Barbados. But I found them last month, and it was very exciting, although we are not very close related because our grandmothers were sisters. But it feels like you found something, and this is very special. And the Eiffel side from Trinidad was very excited too. And he is coming here on Thursday with his mother and his aunt, so we're going to meet. So that is very special. I found family through DNA. Yes.
Another important thing that I would like to mention is the work of Sylvania and her sister in the big Barbados family tree. Is extremely important work that they're doing to connect Barbadian families who are searching for their ancestors.
Because Barbados is an island, everybody at some point intermarriages. So I think almost every person who is really in Barbados, they come up with the same names at some point. So, you know, the Allens, the Haynes, everybody comes, the Gibsons, everybody is in my tree. So my sister decided, we're just going to use everybody. We're just putting everybody in a tree, even if it's not related. And at some point we will find out how they're related. You know, everybody has researched, who was interested, has researched one part, and at some point you will get together and have the whole island in a big tree. But then we had some enthusiastic people on Facebook. It's called Barbados Registry, DNA Registry, and they're very enthusiastic. So some of them reacted to my posts that I would like, you know, to make a big Barbados family tree. But the thing is, how do we start? Which program do we use? Where can we base, you know, what server can we use to put that tree on? And who's going to monitor the whole tree? So that is still, you know, we're in the brainstorm phase.
As in the Netherlands, we have Surinamese Genealogical Society. And the society is by and for Surinamese people. So we support all kinds of activities in the Netherlands and in Suriname, like digitizing all kinds of archives, and our members help with the digitizing as well. So we try to bring about more information for everybody. And we have a Barbados group too, because There are a lot of people who have descendants from the contract labelers who came to Suriname in the 1860s to 1890s. So we have a relationship with Barbados.
I'm still hopeful that I will find who Emily's parents were and maybe her siblings and the descendants of those siblings, because that would be wonderful, isn't it? Just to connect with people, and I like that.
And there it is, perhaps the most profound truth that archives can reveal. That research is never just about the past. It is about the present. It is about the future. It is about the bonds that are strengthened when we fully understand the full story of who we are and where we came from. Those two sisters began this journey as daughters of Suriname, citizens of the Netherlands, and they leave it also as daughters of Barbados, connected to an island, a people, and a heritage that was always theirs, waiting patiently to be found. The records have spoken, the ancestors have heard, and as our final guest so beautifully reminded us, this research will bring them closer together, closer to each other, closer to their roots, and closer to the generations who came before them, whose lives, loves, and struggles are now no longer lost to time. That is the power of preserving history. That is the power of the archives. And that is why we do exactly what we do. Until next time, keep searching, keep asking, and keep listening, because somewhere in the records, your story is waiting too. This has been Archives Alive. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time.